Welcome everybody to another edition of The Radical Imagination. I'm Michael Pelias and your co-host for today. I want to give a shout out to the other co-host, normally James Vretos, and of course to Peter Bratzis and our originator of this series with James Vretos, Stanley Aronowitz. So anyway, with that in mind, I want to start today with our topic, which will be from lockout to contract, and beyond, the LIU case. And as most of the viewers know, I'm a professor at LIU Brooklyn and an active member in the LIU-FF, which is the Long Island University Faculty Federation, the academic union at campus, that has now been in existence for nearly 35 years running. We are the first private university to be unionized in the United States, the LIU Brooklyn Faculty Federation. And today we're going to have a discussion about a very, very, very brutal, if you will, contract negotiation that began last February that ended in a lockout of the faculty, a historically important event, the first time an academic faculty has been locked out of its duties and its teaching from an institution. So this became a newsworthy item and something that brought great attention to the LIU downtown Brooklyn campus. Today I'm going to have a conversation both about the lockout, the history of LIU as an institution, the contract negotiations, where we are today, but in a broader way, another conversation about academic unionism. Is academic unionism really about only getting good contracts and protecting tenure, or should academic unions be involved in the transformation of higher education? So this is a question we will pose during the question as we go along, and also how much reach out should academic unions be doing to other unions that are represented on campus. I'm pleased today to have two colleagues from LIU with me. To my immediate left, Melissa Antinori, a professor in the English department, also a long-standing member of the Long Island University Faculty Federation, and has been the grievance chair, I think, for almost a decade now, or longer, right? Ninth year, running on a decade. And to Melissa's left is Ralph Engelman from the journalism department, also a long-term member of the executive committee of the union and the current vice president of the LIU-FF. I think Ralph has been on the executive committee nearly 30 years now running, right? I've been 23 years, and I think you preceded me by 6-7 years at least as a member of that committee. Ralph also, I want to mention, is also the head of the George Polk Awards with Bob Darton, right?
John Darton, right,
co-administrator. Co-administrator of the George Polk Awards, which is a very prestigious award for investigative reporting. And also Ralph is the author of the first definitive history, if you will, of the history of public broadcasting in the United States and public broadcasting. So I'm pleased to have both of both colleagues as well as two very, very astute observers and participants in the struggles at LIU, and how we could maybe talk about this beyond the LIU case as well. So I'd like to begin. I'm going to let Ralph start with maybe a little bit of history of Long Island University Brooklyn as an institution first, and then we'll kind of come up to the formation of the union and how we, have proceeded in this last contract negotiation, what some of the stakes were. Okay, please, Ralph.
Sure.
Yeah.
The Brooklyn campus of LIU was established in 1926. And its mission was to be a private university that was affordable and open to the really different waves of immigration that swept across Brooklyn. It was Jewish at a certain point in its history, then as Haitian, and all the other communities that came into Brooklyn. So you had a very much of a kind of working class student body. Many of the students were the first in their families to go to college. Also it was a labor-friendly place. I mean, you had among the workers at the university, it was a unionized university. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Many of them attended classes and got degrees themselves, as did their children. The other thing is that in early 1950s, the university got a gift from the Post serial family, and essentially the 300 plus rolling acres in Nassau County, which turned into LIU Post, and at that and the administrative center of the university was moved there. And I just mentioned that to sort of set the stage for what we may discuss later, a kind of culture clash between the two campuses, and the fact that the administrative center and the board of trustees really were based on Long Island. And I think it's one of the factors that is at the root of the problems that we're facing, and is an important context for understanding the lockout.
Right, I think you phrased it as a suburban-urban institution conflict in previous interviews that you've done about this, and I think that's a very good place to analyze it from, given the recent election, that Trump had tremendous support among the suburbs in the state of New York, and
not only
Clinton
that,
had tremendous in
right.
urban. But please, yes,
yeah,
continue.
most of the
and the racial
most
mix,
of the
course.
trustees, come from that Long Island Gold Coast.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, actually, one of the trustees, Howard Lobert, is one of the most prominent supporters of Donald Trump. He's chair of the Douglas Elliman Real Estate company, among other things, has known Trump for 30 years. Right. Our campuses are very different. I think roughly 70% or close to it of the student body in Brooklyn are female. Vast majority of our students are people of color. The makeup of the Post campus is different, as is the composition of the Board of Trustees itself.
Suburban, semi-affluent, white, in
Right.
general, would be more of the mix there. Yes, very good. Yes. I think another, maybe we can make a short transition to, that we've been struggling as a union for close to nearly 40 years at this point. The union was formed because of the possibility of selling off the campus to another educational institution. I think City University was the potential buyer, and that the union was formed basically as a defense against such a sale, and was obviously successful, and has been successful up to date in not having the campus sold off to another educational institution, et cetera, and the encroachments. I've participated in contracts since 1994. We have had, and I want to say this definitively again, and this is of course backed by historical evidence. The administration has spun that we have been on strike 5 of the last 6 contracts. We have not. Of the last 6 contracts, I've been present at all of them. 1994, we were on strike for a short period of time about wages. This lasted maybe about 11 days in actual strike time. We went on strike again in 2003, which was again about wages, and health care. They wanted us to participate in the payment of health care. We defended very effectively against that by a strike. I think the strike could be considered somewhat successful in that period. And then again in 2011, we were on strike over a really, I think, still a disastrous contract offer. And ultimately, we went back to work under kind of very nefarious conditions, at least in terms of the wage package and the new health care. So we did not strike 1997 to 2000, a 3-year period. We did not again strike 2000, 2003, and again 2006 to 2011, which was our first 5-year contract going forward. So I want to put that out there that we have not. So
Right.
please,
Well,
Melissa, let
yeah.
Melissa,
I
and
might
then,
just,
well, yeah.
just add that part of the rhetoric from the
yeah,
administration
yes.
has been that not only have we gone on strike for 5 of the last 6 contracts, but that one of those strikes was weeks long and was very damaging to the university. In fact, you have to go back to the mid-1980s.
Yes.
When I believe it was a strike, they were threatening to do away with tenure.
Yes.
When there was a 6-week strike. The strikes since then, 94 forward, have tended to be fairly short-lived, less than a week of classes, and certainly more short-lived than the lockout, which lasted for 12 days.
Yeah, indeed.
You know, I want to
Yes,
make a
please.
distinction
Yes.
and ask Melissa
Yes.
a question. It's true that the LIUFF, our faculty union, has a long and militant history, and there have been a number of strikes over the years. However, in the past, there never was a serious attempt to break our union or to break the unions, the other unions on campus. And it seems that what is happening now, and the lockout is only a part of it, is really an initiative to try to either outsource, work that previously has been done by unionized people on campus, or break the unions. And I'm curious, Melissa, you as a veteran of negotiations, whether you see any difference in the, sort of the quality of the way in which the negotiations have played out.
Oh, most
This time
definitely.
compared to in the past.
Most definitely, right? This is my 3rd time through negotiations. I'm the note taker, right? So I write everything down as much.
Well, you
verbatim
participate
right.
as well.
Well, I
have
do,
to
I
add
do,
that,
but
yes.
but I do try to capture the spirit of the negotiations. And I think in the past, there's always been a sense of, we have this disagreement. Obviously, they don't want to pay us as much as we want to be paid, right? And so we've had disagreements. We've had disagreements over academic and other kinds of issues. But there was always a sense that, we are all ultimately working for the same goal, right? We are all working for the betterment of the university, and that we'll kind of get through this and we'll figure something out. That was really missing this time, right? I felt there was much more of a kind of clash and a gap that felt harder and harder to bridge, I think.
Yes, the tenor that I've experienced is it's their way or the highway, and there's been really no negotiation at all. It is kind of a misnomer to use the word negotiation at this point. It's their proposals or nothing.
Yeah.
Right,
And,
and the way we're going forward. And just to add one other thing here is that the spirit at the table is that of a very different spirit, that there is no wiggle room, there is no real tinkering that is being allowed. So this lockout in some ways was, in a lot of ways, the logical conclusion. We began, again, these contract negotiations in February of this year, and here we are, we still have no contract in November. There's been no tinkering. There's been no attempt to be flexible on any points.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is very different. I've been, as I said, multiple negotiations as well. Yeah.
I think we can take this
Right.
thread and,
Right.
relate it to the larger picture of labor on that campus. One of the things that we've done is which I think is a source of strength for us, and one of the reasons we were able to defeat the lockout, is we created a labor council made up of the different unions on campus so we could share information and support one another. And in doing so, it became clear to us how many of the unions, the other unions, were working without contracts and were really the victims of attempts at a kind of de facto crushing of the unions. You have and it's interesting because those unions are really like a cross-section of New York labor. I mean, you've got the secretaries, Local 153, OPEIU, without a contract since 2012. They have an imposed contract currently. The carpenters and joiners, the they don't have a contract since 2013. All right. The engineers have not had a contract since 2015, the operating engineers. So there's been a whole pattern of a failure of the administration or a refusal to really negotiate, with them. And the other union, 32BJ, that represented the both janitorial and security, they have been outsourced. So there is a pattern here of going after labor on this campus as part of an austerity, strategy. Now, having the solidarity between among the unions was very important in our ability ultimately to break the lockout. I don't know whether we want to turn and talk a little bit to what was a remarkable organizing effort that involved these labor unions and the parent organizations, the political representation in Brooklyn.
Yes.
And there was a major press campaign as well, which both of you were involved in, and I think it'll be worth.
We'll talk about that, but I just want to mention before we go on to that, since you were one of the founders of the Central Labor Council, you call it, on the campus, that this was the first time that I know of, at least in New York City, where a bunch of academics reached out to other unions in terms of a real coalition forming base. And this is unusual that we've been doing this. That, I think academics have a very hard time seeing themselves as workers.
Good point.
I think they also see a very hard time seeing these struggles as struggles between labor and capital. And capital in many of its manifestations. There's no such thing as nice and kind and evil capital. It's still capital, and how do we understand this in this movement? So I think that it's very important that LIU, again, is a focal point for this kind of reach out, of which you, Ralph, were very instrumental in getting done, right? You and Stacy Gotti, another colleague of ours, and Jessica Rosenberg, our president. Yes, let's start there, as well as their participation in the lockout. I think they were integral to keeping the spirit of the lockout alive, everything including the symbolic rat on the Flatbush Avenue, to, still being very active with us, willing to support us as we go forward, as we are to support them. So maybe you can talk about this, and Melissa also can, chime in on, this role of the others.
Yeah, Melissa, why don't you just talk a little bit about what it was like once, how the effort to break the lockout or end the lockout manifested itself.
You mean at the table?
No, in front of.
Well, I think, the other labor unions were obviously very, very integral to that. Like Michael said, they brought in the big rat, right? So just that kind of visual representation of not all is not well here, right? And having that support. And I think we learned a lot from the other unions on campus about organizing and about pushing our cause forward. I think the other thing that was incredibly important was the support from the students. We talk about the other unions on campus, but the students organized, right? And they had a walkout. They had walkouts, I think, every day during the lockout.
Yeah, the chant was faculty lockout, student walkout.
Yeah.
Was a kind of ongoing chant on a regular basis every day from noon to 1:30. They were organized, and it was pitched and spun by more spun by the administration as a small minority. But just to say, to have 300 to 400 students at LIU participating every day in a commuter school. That's quite a strength, a show of strength. Quite a show. Yeah.
I want to again go back for a minute to the labor support. We had on the picket line, we had people from all the unions. The AFT, which is our parent union, came in. I want to underscore, Michael, what you said, that this was unprecedented, a lockout of academics. And for this reason, this became a national story and an international story. And we had support from labor, across the country. We had communication and support. The AFT came in. They brought people, staff from Washington and Philadelphia. They rented a room in a hotel and had a kind of a war room. I mean, this was a serious effort here. And we got tremendous support from labor, you know, again, from students. And I also want to say from the Brooklyn politicians whose support we have cultivated for many years. Letitia James, when she was on the city council before she became public advocate, was a great, you know, supporter of her. As a matter of fact, earlier in the summer, well before the lockout, we had met with her. She had sent a letter to the president of the university, signed by a wide swath of Brooklyn political figures, both from the New York State Assembly, Senate, New York City Council, calling attention to all the unsigned contracts, the fact that ads were out for replacement workers, for scabs, for us. And you know, she intervened. She spoke at our rallies. Walter Mosley, who one of our representatives in the state assembly,
Walter Mosley Jr. Not to be confused with the novelist,
right? And a wide, you know, Laurie Cumbo and many others. So that there was a mobilization here, you know, that again that embraced labor, students, and Brooklyn politicians. And the reason the Brooklyn politicians understood, you know, why this was such a problem is precisely because of the kind of colonial status of our campus that we talked about earlier vis-a-vis Long Island. And so they weighed in heavily and were a very important force there.
Yes, I think it's important. I know that all our viewers know about the so-called Brooklyn Renaissance, all the the downtown Brooklyn building that has gone on. The area around BAM has been made into a new kind of cultural center and complex with Mark Morris, the Shakespeare Theater, the the BAM Harvey, all of these things trying to be integrated into this new complex of high rises. There's going to be a 12,000 square foot Apple store 1 block away from LIU. So we are also in this struggle against real estate interests and a kind of overall gentrification of the neighborhood, going back to the mission of LIU, that part of the force, and I think one thing that mobilized the faculty a lot, is that LIU has gotten very far away from its mission, right, in this contract negotiation as well, and under this new administration. And I think that was one guiding principle that people could all adhere to, you know, in the faculty, you know, as we move forward. And that the struggle has national attention because it is about education versus that of real estate development in a way. That antagonism is being shown very, very clearly as we see. And we see it on our own campus, where much of the new space is being used for entrepreneurial centers, for Bloomberg terminals, right? We're beginning to see this. There's commercial stores. We have a Browse store, you know, that, you know, sells computer equipment and, you know, some of the Apple equipment, why they think they can compete with Apple itself a block and a half, 2 blocks away is beyond me as well. But again, I want to keep this somewhat framed also in the larger picture that this is a war on education. And this is something that the politicians seem to understand, and also the AFT in their you know, kind of limited capacity, but they understood. It's a war on the students. It's a war on the future of education. You know, and as you say, it's also a war by the colonialists out on in Long Island, right, against the colonized, right? And we used to affectionately say, I mean, with tongue in cheek, that out there's the plantation and we're the factory, and we used to have the resort that we sold off called Southampton. Right?
You know, and I don't say this, you know, simply in metaphorical terms, because we have discovered, and I don't, Melissa, you may be best equipped to discuss it. You know, we discovered significant disparities, really discriminatory policies in, you know, between the two universities. Again, it's hard probably for people to picture. You know, the Post faculty has this equestrian center. It has horses again, and all the rest. It's got books. that its library has many more books and staff that our library has, but we found out about other disparities as well. I don't know if you want to speak
Yeah,
to
please
those.
speak
Right.
to the parity issue.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is a very crucial part
It is.
of
I
the
mean, and
negotiation.
to
Yeah.
contextualize the
Yes,
entire
right,
negotiations,
right, good.
you know, one of the things that we have to understand is that, yeah, the post faculty get paid more than the Brooklyn faculty,
Mm-hmm.
right? Their salary minima are higher than ours. So a starting professor at the post campus could be making the same or more than someone at the Brooklyn campus who has been there for a decade or more, or sometimes longer than that, right? So, and for all kinds of reasons, the differentials have continued to grow. And we could argue that they get more investment probably in their physical plant, right? They have the horses, right? But I think the other issue that we haven't talked about yet is, you know, in negotiations, they did make us an offer to begin to rectify that. It was, under their proposal, it was going to take 5 years to bring everybody up to simply the minimum that the people at Post are making now. But the way they wanted to pay for that was on the backs of the adjunct faculty, right? So they are taking away any benefits that the adjunct faculty have in terms of a healthcare trust fund, in terms of seniority payments. They want to reduce the pay scale for incoming adjunct faculty. They want to reduce the potential for promotions for adjunct faculty. They want to take away an office hour. They want to take away the number of credits adjuncts can teach in order to, you know, make the money to pay for, to bring the full-time faculty into kind of alignment with what they're making at Post. And that, you know, that in itself is a real attack on labor, right? And it's an
Yes.
attack on adjunct faculty teach, what, 65 to 70% of the credits
Yeah.
taught at the Brooklyn campus, and kind of saying, okay, you know, our most vulnerable population needs to pay for the full-time faculty has been a real sticking point. And, you know, in terms, I think, of academic labor nationwide, it's with the part-time faculty that we see most organizing going on at campuses. That's
Yes.
where we see new unions forming, often is among the part-time faculty.
Right.
So that opens up another whole kind
Yes.
of
I
issue or
think-
area of
Yeah.
conversation.
This raises, I mean, a very good question. Just to go back to the numbers, first of all, by this war that the administration has against the adjunct faculty wouldn't begin to scratch the surface
No.
of paying for the parity.
No,
So
it would
this
not.
is a myth. It's a function of disciplinary and disciplining and controlling this
Yeah.
this contingent labor force, and actually hoping that they'll be able to hire people at much lower wages in the future. This is on their horizon and also one of their proposals. And again, look, this is the way capital operates. It goes always against the most vulnerable. That's the first thing they're going to do in an austerity program. And we can see at LIU, this is what's happened. Low-level administrators, you know, have been fired, right, or laid off.
Right,
Right.
and been
We have
replaced
this
with
and
more,
replaced
more high-level administrators.
Yes, but
right?
replaced by more high-level administrators. So this is not really cost savings. It's also a dynamic of controlling your labor force and disciplining your labor force. So this is another aspect that's not really talked about much at the table so much,
No.
but it's talked about amongst us as we, you know, as we continue in the contract negotiations on the negotiating team. The other thing is, yes, the role of contingent labor is a very important thing, you know, globally, obviously. It is the number one concern. Most people are working, putting together 2, sometimes 3 part-time jobs, mainly because the full-time jobs just aren't there. And in academia, this is a very long story. We could do a whole program, or maybe 2 or 3, just on what happened, and maybe we should, about academic labor and how this situation has come to be. You know, how we have this whole generation of tremendously overeducated people who cannot find work, who cannot find really meaningful work, and have to piece together a living, you know, through multiple part-time gigs. So yes, so to us, this was the worst part of the contract offer, and it still goes on, that somehow they're going to try to split the union, divide the union by playing the part-timers off against the full-timers and vice versa. And this is something that up to date has not worked, from their end, that strategy that they have had. And yeah, you were going to say something.
Well,
I'm sorry.
simply
Yeah,
just
yeah,
maybe
please.
state the obvious here that I think one of our strengths as a union is the fact that both full-timers and part-timers are together. And I think we are, so far, I think we have been pretty strong in resisting any attempts
I would
to
say it's a
divide.
very enormous solidarity up
Yeah,
to date.
absolutely.
It's been really a great solidarity, and I have to say on behalf of the negotiating team, the solidarity that's been shown on this matter has exceeded even my expectations, which are usually high for being in the union, right?
I don't know if either of you want to mention some of the gains over the years, hard-fought gains, not sufficient, but gains nonetheless, that the adjuncts have gotten.
I know both of you are my guests, but I'll talk really to
I
this
thi-
just
I
in a
think-
second.
Yeah,
I just
sorry.
want to speak to a couple of things that you sort of omitted about the history of the strikes or whatever, or Melissa as well. The first strike was really about the parity, the first major strike that took place in 1979 to 1980. This was a really brutal strike to get parity with the colony, right? With a colonial,
Right.
part of the administration. So this was very, very significant, and out of that there was a resolve to fix that parity. So there was an admittance and also a remedy that went on. Then the next strike was really about tenure. They had tried to attack tenure, and I think that's the strike you participated in, which was a 6-week strike, going forward.
In the mid-'80s.
In the mid-'80s. Now, the adjuncts used to be included in all the contracts. Adjuncts actually had health care, and somehow, and also, many more rights than they even have today. Somehow, in the contracts and in the negotiations, that got lost.
Yeah, it was a parity issue.
It was a parity issue, okay. Yes, and so today, yes, there have been gains. 2003, there was a gain at the table to build a benefits trust fund, which was really aimed at helping people with health care costs. We distribute money annually to people who pay entirely their health care costs, their insurance premiums, in other words. They have to be enrolled, they have to be there a specific time, have shown a commitment to the university. Another gain that was made was a step scale for those people that have committed many years to LIU. Every 4 years there's what is called a seniority or a rank promotion, right, every 4 years. And we have 2 steps above that of the full professor. And then finally seniority payments, which were created because they did not want to let adjuncts participate with the administration contribution to a pension fund, to the TIA CREFT. So so instead we got something called a seniority payment, and also an office hour for adjuncts teaching three courses, primarily 4 courses a semester, all of which these benefits they want off the table right now, including the step scale, because they want to eliminate in the future step scale. They want to hire people only to the full professor level. Right. So this is a real battle. So the 20 years, or at least the 15 years of gains are now being attempted, the attempt is to wipe the slate clean. And they're well aware that they can go out and probably hire, some people. I don't know who would take a job at $3,000, a course at this point, because that means if you're teaching 3 courses at LIU, you're making $18,000 a year. Now, how can one survive in New York City? You're better off working at McDonald's as a junior manager. So, again, this war on education and this war on the educated as well. This is another real war that is happening.
Just
please.
along those lines, let me pick up on something you said at the very beginning, which is that our contracts are not simply about dollars and cents, but really have to do also with maintaining the academic integrity of the institution. That is, the past struggles around around tenure, keeping in mind that tenure historically was not simply there for job security, but for academic freedom. So that one can speak one's mind, irrespective of whether the president of the university or other officers are happy with what you say or not. There are issues of faculty control of the curriculum, of due process, and grievances, which Melissa has played a central role.
Yes.
So I think that's something that needs to be emphasized. I don't know if any of you want to sort of develop
Let Melissa. Yeah.
Well,
on that front.
I mean, I'll go with the first thing you were talking about, which is sort of the educational role. I mean, one of the arguments that we've been making over and over again at the table with regards to adjunct faculty is that it's to the university's advantage to have adjunct faculty who are committed to the university, right? Who have made the decision to teach at LIU, to spend most of their working lives at LIU. We have part-time faculty who've been there for 20, 25 years and who make a real and significant contribution to the university. And what they're trying to do with the economic package is going to make that harder and less likely to happen, right? So that's one thing, and that's one thing that as a union we emphasize, right? That we're not simply wanting more money for our own pockets, but that we're thinking about the ramifications of how our working conditions are going to affect what happens in the classroom.
And also
right?
maintains the mission.
Absolutely.
Because who needs that kind of commitment but our kind of students who
Absolutely.
who are usually still first generation, college students.
Right.
Those who are in need of, for lack of a better word, some remediation. I don't like the word, but for lack of they come out of, quote, secondary schools very unprepared.
They're
right?
underprepared.
Underprepared, right.
Well,
Exactly.
And it's largely part-time faculty who are teaching that population of students in their first two years at the university, right? So it's very important that we have good teachers and teachers who have made a commitment to the university and to our students.
Yes.
Right. So what happens at the table isn't just about the economics. It really does reach into the classroom. And but I think another thing you were talking about is the non-economic elements of the contract. Right. So one of the major issues that's been facing us this year is that the administration wants to add a form of post-tenure review, right? Which we have seen as a kind of challenge to academic freedom. Right, that once you get tenure, you've been recognized by your peers and by the university as being someone the university wants to keep around, and that often for faculty opens up new avenues of research and exploration, and that post-tenure review might actually kind of tamp down some of the creativity and exploration because there's always someone kind of watching over you. So that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with as well.
Yeah, and we're also seeing, an attempt to control curriculum more. We're an attempt to control the online distance learning. All of these things are very, very real issues in terms of teaching. And LIU is a teaching institution.
It is.
And it is not a research institution. First of all, we may have capabilities for research there and some people who do it, but in general, human capabilities, but we don't have the infrastructure. We do not have the library. We do not have and another thing, we've lost our metropolitan card that we can go around to other libraries and get books. This is another thing that's happened, in this debacle of the last year. Going back to what Melissa said, as a teaching institution, this is very, very important to remember. It's not only about wages and conditions of work, it's about the quality of the teaching faculty and supporting that. Yes, please.
One question I have for you, I'm curious, given the problem that we're facing now with administration kind of encroachment on the traditional prerogatives of faculty in regard to curriculum, to what extent do you feel that we as a union can address these matters, in the contract, or is this something that the faculty senate handles and we don't have that much leverage?
It's harder for the union to address those issues because they're not in the contract, right? So a lot of the curricular issues, for instance, redeveloping a new core curriculum for general education, like all of that really happens in the Senate. I mean, it's the same people, we're just wearing different hats, right? So it's not easy to pursue those issues through the contract. We do find little ways occasionally to do it, but it's largely a Senate issue, I think.
But the contract is a way of protecting the energies of the
Right.
faculty, and making sure those energies are put to good use, in the institution. And this is where,
Right.
the struggle really is in a contract negotiation. I mean, I think we're talking about things both within the contract, but way beyond the contract too, issues that are going on that remain hidden to the public. You make X amount of dollars a year as a professor, you teach 2 or 3 classes. No, it's much more than that. It's much more that in terms of not only recognition, but support. And this is something that I think, most professors, at institutions like LIU in a way are experiencing, certainly being experienced at the community college level. And I think this is a national problem. We're a microcosm. We're a very active microcosm because of our activist union and our militant union over the years, and because of this lockout. And the focal points, are here right now, media points, and your work with local politicians and making this into, really something that is a cause worth, fighting for. But at the same time, this is a national problem. What has happened? I mean, we look at the recent election. This is also a failure of education on both sides, I think. We basically had an issueless, series of debates, for the last 6 months. Since Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race, there have been no issues on the table about systemic inequality, about climate change, things that should be in the classroom, talked about, especially, in any course, any science course should be dealing with climate change, or at least have some aspect of that, as well as, any humanities, history, political science, journalism course should be talking about systemic inequality that's happening in disenfranchisement. So, yeah.
But for
just to kind of go
Yeah.
back to your question about the
Yeah,
role
sorry,
of the union.
I had
no,
to, I had
it's
to go
fine,
beyond
it's
for a
fine.
second.
Yeah. And we should. But
Right.
I think one of the things the union does is protects the processes and the way by which faculty are enabled to do the research, right? We protect sabbaticals.
Yes.
Right? We protect or try to get as much as we can in terms of faculty development funds, so faculty can travel, right? So they can go to conferences, so they can share their research with other people. We protect those things within the contract. So, we're making sure that processes go the way they should, that people are judged impartially and fairly, and that when that doesn't happen, then we have a contract that we can go back to and we can file grievances and say, you're not doing what you're supposed to do.
all right, let me.
Okay, you want to
Let
be?
me-
You want?
yeah,
I'll reverse the roles.
Yeah,
here.
okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah.
It's all right. I know
right.
you have a history of interviewing.
I want to turn this to sort of the hard work ahead. The good news is we defeated the lockout. This was a major victory, and it was one that, again, it was part of a broad struggle as we've discussed it. It resonated all over, not just nationally, but
Right.
internationally. It was covered by The Guardian, Russia Today, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a great victory. But the question is, where do we go from here? We agreed, and there's, I guess, there's been some, disagreement about the merits of this, but it's water under the bridge. We agreed to extend our contract, through May, and to continue negotiating. So, in a sense, it was a great victory, and there's a tremendous mobilization that is still percolating and is still working around these issues. But the fact remains, we're back to the negotiating table. Our sister unions still don't have contracts. So, where do we go from here?
Go
ahead, Melissa. Okay. You'll give the practical,
right,
I'll give the theoretical
right.
here.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, obviously, I think one of the positive things that came out of the lockout was that we found that we have a tremendous amount of support on campus, and that we can, build a great coalition within our faculty, right? That we can actually kind of work together to get something, to make something happen. And I think that has to continue, right? not only our work with each other as faculty, but work with the other unions on campus, reaching out to the community and making the community understand that, hey, this happened to us, this could happen to you too, right? Working with other universities, working with our sister campus. So I think that has to continue, and continue in a very strong way. I mean, Michael was talking about sort of academics a little while ago, and I think one of the things that I would like to see happen is that, you know, some of the conversations that started on the picket lines outside the lockout, you know, it brought people together from across the campus and from different disciplines, and put people in conversation who maybe don't talk to each other that often. And one of the things I'd like to see happen too is conversations start to happen about curriculum and how we can move forward and do some innovative and creative things, you know, in our classroom, you know, cross-pollination between different disciplines and different schools. So I think that could kind of continue. Michael will talk about the sort of theoretical, I suppose.
Well,
going
no, I
from
mean,
here,
no,
but,
please, okay, yeah,
But let
go
me
ahead,
just
Ralph.
underscore,
Yeah,
I think you make a very important point. And it was really amazing to see how this struggle changed people.
It did.
And changed us.
And the
You know,
attitude changed not only the people, but really the generalized attitude about administration at LIU.
For one thing, talking about the students, student leadership emerged.
Yes.
Incredible student leadership.
Yes.
I mean, it really brings back memories for those of us old enough to remember the 60s about how a situation developed in which students who were not necessarily that politically engaged became engaged, began to find their voice and their own power. I thought that was remarkable.
Yes, it was.
And at the same time, we see faculty members, including, you know, people on our executive committee who were, you know, felt vulnerable, were afraid to speak out, were not sure what their roles are, come into themselves and emerge. You know, we've had new leadership, you know, there as well. It's been kind of really remarkable. And I think it's awfully important and that we tap that you know, that energy. But saying that, you know, with a sense that there's a very difficult struggle ahead. That's all.
I mean, and one thing I guess I'd add is that I think we see the integral nature of full-time and part-time faculty to the campus. And one of the things I'd like to see happen is part-time faculty being able to participate more in governance structures, having votes on curricular issues, because they're so involved in teaching the curriculum. So I'd like to say, I think that's an important thing to have happen going forward.
And then just I won't raise this to high-level theoretical stuff, whatever. And I don't know if I really could today anyway. But anyway, just to speak to something else, I think this is a time, you know, listen, we may end up in May in the position, or next fall in the position where we're going to have to make a decision if we're going to go on strike. This may be one outcome, you know, of where we are. You know, that's the most pessimistic, or at least, you know, a real possibility in all of this. However, in the meantime, I think both of you are right in terms of it brought together a very diverse group of people, faculty that never talked to faculty, talk to each other finally, right? They had common interests in many ways, see common perspectives at this point. So this worked. The students, as you mentioned, again, were, you know, I think were transformed by this. You know, they're starting to read, they're asking what kind of books they could, you know, engage on these levels, you know, so maybe there is this, you know, very positive step towards transformative politics that may take hold at a national level, as, you know, as we see coming out of the protests, post-election blues now for a lot of people. But on another level, what Melissa pointed to, I'd like to see very much faculty start doing creative things. How do we build links between journalism and media arts and urban studies together in terms of new kinds of course offerings, new types of things that really make it a vital place of ideas? Where would you do with what would you do with English and philosophy and, you know, humanities departments in general to really build an idea factory rather than just a quote unquote a factory that has a bunch of tenured academics who pick up their paycheck and teach their classes and go home. So maybe this kind of communicative moment might be something worth struggling for as we go back to the table and start thinking about what is the future of the institution? How do we make this institution really viable going into the future? What is the creativity? Because it's one thing to fight against a nefarious and a black hole type of administration and constantly criticize them. And as most people know, there was a vote of no confidence taken in the present administration, the president, and the academic vice president. But really, how do we transform things is what I would see as part of an integral discussion as we go forward. And maybe that would seep into the table as well, or into the Faculty Senate and Union Executive Committee. So please say, what else? We have time. We have,
Okay.
yeah, please.
Right.
What else you see coming down the future? I mean, I'm hoping that we were able really to negotiate a contract
Right.
as quickly as
Right.
possible. But
Yeah. I mean, I think that's important. We have to get a contract, right? Because what Michael
Right.
didn't say is that, come May 31st, if we haven't come to an agreement, they could impose a contract. And then we'll be in the same position as the other unions on campus and have to make some tough decisions. I'm hoping it doesn't get to that point. And I think the way to keep it from getting to that point is to continue putting on the pressure, right? We need to continue to show the administration and ourselves
Yes.
that we're unified, that we're organized, that we're still here, right? That we're still paying attention. We need to continue the outreach to our students, right? And keep the students aware and involved. And we need to do the same with our sister unions on campus, and continue to help each other out, I think.
Maybe
'cause
we
they're
can call it
still-
Operation Cassius. We'll keep
There we
ourselves
go.
lean,
Right.
mean, and hungry
Exactly.
going forward.
Right. But, and even after a contract is signed, there are still issues with the administration that will have to be resolved in some way. Thinking about the direction of the university, is it going to become much more professionalized and serving professional and business programs? How do we build the liberal arts and sciences? I think that's going to be one of the major questions facing
Yes.
us, contract or not. What's the role of the liberal arts in the future of Long Island University and in the future of universities in general? So I think these are all conversations
Yeah.
that we need to
And of
be
course,
having
you
and
could
continue
speak
to
to the
have.
role of the Central Labor Council in all of this.
Right.
I mean, what support, what kind of integrative, movement could we, gain from this thing that you, helped create
Right.
and are working with? Yeah.
Right, we're continuing to explore different avenues of cooperation. We're considering informational picketing and a sort of show of force or a presence at one another's negotiations, lining the halls, and other things as well. And this is something that we discuss, in our LIU Labor Council meetings, and we're in touch with the higher ups of the parent organizations as well, because they see what we're doing in building this coalition as a kind of a model of where labor should go. And especially, in the environment, you make reference to the election of the presidential election. These are difficult times, for labor. And the old way, the sort of Gomperist way, well, my union, I've got my contract so I can relax and forget about everybody else.
Yeah.
No.
Those days are behind us.
Right.
Yes, definitely.
So that we will, if and when we get a contract, we will not be satisfied until
Right.
the
They
other
get-
unions
right.
get a
And
contract.
it should be pointed out that we set the standard for wages, and this is another thing that we're in that moment of having to do so.
And by the
We're
way,
yeah, please,
you
quickly
know,
though.
this involvement with the other unions, we talked about the quality of life, of the quality of the academic life on campus. These unions, the fact that the severe austerity policies of this
absolutely.
administration have had a terrible impact on the the cleanliness of the institution,
right.
problems with
Well, we're certainly not doing an advertisement for the university now.
right.
So.
Problems in you know,
We wanted to
in the
survive for
dorms,
various
do.
reasons.
you know.
Yeah.
So the fact that they are understaffed,
Right.
the
Okay.
outsourcing
Okay.
and poor work
Good.
hurts, you know, ultimately the academic mission as
Great.
well.
But
I want to,
but
yeah, please, real
just
quickly.
real
yeah,
quick.
yeah.
But just to add that, you know, we have wonderful students at LIU.
Yes.
And I think one of the things we're fighting for is those students and the fact that we
Absolutely.
see such potential in them and in the institution. And, you know, if we could get past some of these problems, we could start to do
We could really
very,
make it into a very great
different-
place, a
yeah,
different place.
exactly.
Yes. So I want to thank Melissa Antinori and Ralph Engelman for joining me today in this very, very interesting and high-powered discussion about academic unionism in the case of LIU. I also want to give a shout out to our president, Jessica Rosenberg, to Emily Dobritsky, who is an officer, the secretary of the union. The other two officers were missing Mohammed Griga, the treasurer. Emily has been first rate in getting out, you know, social media, and
She's
has
our
really
switchboard.
shown her really great organizing talent throughout all of this. And of course to our executive committee, who has been really involved in the struggle, and to all the faculty at LIU. The struggle continues, and we hopefully will bring great creativity and a very positive result to all of this. So I thank you very much for today's
Thank you.
program, and we'll do it again, hopefully on a much more positive note, that we have a great contract with big raises, new libraries, etc. So thank you very much. This is Michael Pelias for the Radical Imagination. I'll probably see you in 2 weeks. James Retos will be back next week. Thank you very much.